بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So last week we were discussing the beginning of the persecution of the Muslims, and we said in terms of the Quraysh turning up the persecution and the torturing of the Muslims. So we mentioned how they got together and they decided that they were going to take severe action against the Muslims. So they would, curse and insult the nobles. They would boycott the businessmen, and they rounded up the slaves and they beat them and they tortured them in many, many different severe and brutal manners. We talked about the story of Bilal radiallahu anhu. We spoke about the story of Yasir and Sumayya and their son Ammar radiallahu anhum ajma'een. We also spoke about the story of Khabbab ibn al-Arat, and along with other stories as well. Now, what happened to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself? Was he okay during this whole time? Was he being harmed? Was he being persecuted? So we've already mentioned several times before that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's case was a little bit special because of his special lineage and because of his uncle Abu Talib. So overall, compared to the other Sahaba, and definitely in comparison to the slaves, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ remained relatively protected. However, even he was not completely immune. And there were times where he was harassed, in terms of verbally harassed, times where he was physically harassed, and there were, later on in the seerah we're going to see, there were even assassination attempts happening against him. So, however, as we go through the incidents, we find that sometimes Allah Azza wa Jal protected Prophet Muhammad ﷺ from the harassment, meaning like someone from Quraysh wanted to harass him, but Allah Azza wa Jal protected him. And in other times, we actually get to see that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was not protected. Or rather, Allah Azza wa Jal, for a wisdom of His, He allowed whatever harm to actually take place. And there are many incidents which we'll mention inshallah today. There is an incident that mentions, it's a very famous incident, that Abu Jahl, and we mentioned last week Abu Jahl, he is one of the enemy leaders, one of the worst enemies of Islam. He is the Fir'aun of the Ummah. Abu Jahl, one day he was sitting with his gang, in front of the Kaaba. And he was just, doing his thing with his people. And one day, in particular, he was boasting to his friends around him. And he swore by Al-Lat and Al-Uzza that if I see him come and pray in front of the Kaaba again, which was the norm of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, I'm going to walk up to him and I'm going to basically step on his neck as he is making sujood, and I'm going to basically throw dust on his face. So the day came. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he came and he started praying, and Abu Jahl, he got ready. All of his friends were watching. Abu Jahl walked up to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ eventually goes into sajda. Abu Jahl walks a little bit forward, but then very quickly his actions changed. And instead he started backing away, and he started motioning with his hands, like he's pushing something away. He's trying to protect himself from something, and he's continued to walk back, and he returned back eventually to his people, and he was very pale. And his friends were like, what, all this big talk that you're going to go up to him and step on his neck. What is this embarrassing act? Abu Jahl said, you guys did not see what I saw. And Abu Jahl says to his friends, إِنَّ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَهُ لَخَنْدَقًا مِّن نَارٍ وَهَؤُلَاءِ أَجْنِحَةٌ. I saw, when I came close to him, I saw between me and the Prophet ﷺ a pit of fire. And above this fire, I saw wings. That's what he called them. I saw wings hovering on top of this fire. So when Prophet Muhammad ﷺ then finished, his salah, and probably heard of this incident from the Muslims. He told the Muslims, لو دنا مني لاختطفته الملائكة عضوا عضوا. If he were to take just one more step, if he were to get any closer to me at that point, the angels would have shredded him into bits. عضوا عضوا, piece by piece. And according to some tafsir, this is the revelation of the second half of Surah Al-Alaq. So we mentioned the first 5 ayahs. Those were revealed during the first revelation, Ghar Hira. The second half, أفرأيت الذي ينهى عبدا إذا صلى أرأيت الذي ينهى عبدا إذا صلى أرأيت إن كان على الهدى أو أمر بالتقوى أرأيت إن كذب وتولى. This is speaking about, have you ever seen the one who stands against the person who prays? Did he never think that this person might have been upon guidance? أرأيت إن كذب وتولى. Do you see this arrogant person as he continues to reject and he turns away? ألم يعلم بأن الله يرى كلا لئن لم ينتهي لنسفعا بالناصية ناصية كاذبة خاطئة فليدع ناديه. Let him call his friends. Let him call whatever backup he wants. سندع الزبانية. We shall call the Zabaniya. What are the Zabaniya? The angels of punishment. So this is one narration that is mentioned. Also, another narration that has to do with Abu Jahl. There are many narrations which have interactions between the leaders of Quraysh and Prophet Muhammad, and many revelations and lots of Quran being revealed at this point. Many of the Makki surahs which you are reading, which talk about the warnings of the Day of Judgment and whatnot, a lot of them in fact were revealed because they have the same pattern of backstories. And I'm not going to mention all of them, but the same thing. One of the enemy leaders would walk out to Prophet Muhammad and he would mock him, or he would challenge him, or he would say something and Allah Azza wa Jal would respond. So for example, we are told that one time Abu Jahl, once again, when Prophet Muhammad was praying one time next to Maqam Ibrahim, Abu Jahl, he mocked him and he insulted him, and he says basically to him, didn't I tell you you're not allowed to do this anymore? And he basically threatened him and he said, don't let me catch you doing this again. But however, Prophet Muhammad in this specific incident, he didn't stay silent. And he actually went up to Abu Jahl. And in one narration, he mentions he even grabbed him by his collar. And he said to him very sternly, أَوْلَى لَكَ فَأَوْلَى ثُمَّ أَوْلَى لَكَ فَأَوْلَى. And أَوْلَى لَكَ فَأَوْلَى is like woe to you. It's a form of threat. It's a form of warning. Like, be careful. Watch your back. Once again, be careful. And so Abu Jahl responds to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, are you threatening me, O Muhammad? بِأَيِّ شَيْءٍ تُهَدِّدُنِي. What are you threatening me with? وَاللَّهِ لَا تَسْتَطِيعُ أَنْتَ وَلَا رَبَّكَ شَيْئًا. You and your God, you are not able to do anything to me. أما والله إني لأكثر هذا الوادي ناديا وإني لأعز من مشى بين جبليها. You are never going to be able to do anything to me. I am the most honorable person in this land, and I have the most backup and the most power in this land. In a different narration as well, Urwa ibn Zubayr, one time he asked Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, this is a narration found in al-Bukhari, where he asked Abdullah, he says, tell me the worst thing that you've ever seen happen to Prophet Muhammad in early Mecca, in Mecca. So he responds and he says, I saw one time Prophet Muhammad praying next to the Kaaba. And then Uqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt. Uqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt is one of the worst of the worst. So you have all of these enemies. The worst of the worst you have is Uqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt. And arguably some scholars, they even they rank him worse than Abu Jahl even. And he came one time from behind Prophet Muhammad as he's praying. SubhanAllah. Every time they go to harass him and physically harm him, it's when he's praying. Why? Because they know he's not going to respond when he's praying. He's focusing on something else. So he comes behind him and he took off his garment and he wrapped it around the neck of Prophet Muhammad and he began squeezing and he began choking Prophet Muhammad and nobody stepped in to help. because this is Uqba bin Abi Mu'ayt. Who's going to step in to help? This is like one of the most noble of all the nobles. So if definitely no slave is going to step up, otherwise he'll get killed. And the other Muslims, Allahu Alam, they were not around or they didn't want to come closer. And it was only Abu Bakr as-Siddiq who later steps in. When he heard of this happening, and he saw this happening, he ran and he pushed Uqba away. And he said the phrase which Allah Azza wa Jal quotes in the Quran out of respect for Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, أَتَقْتُلُونَ رَجُلًا أَن يَقُولَ رَبِّيَ اللَّهُ وَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ. Are you about to kill this man? You're about to kill this man just because he claimed or he said that Allah is my Lord, and he is coming to you with all the evidences and all the proofs. So in this case, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, you can say he was harmed, but Allah Azza wa Jalla sent Abu Bakr as-Siddiq to protect him. Okay? Another incident, we get to see that he did not really have protection. And sometimes harm was allowed to happen to him by the will of Allah Azza wa Jal. And this is a narration narrated by Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. And he's narrating this because he was an eyewitness to this incident. And he says, one time, once again, the same story. One time Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was praying in front of the Kaaba. When Abu Jahl and his companions were sitting as usual around each other in the distance, they were seeing him praying. And the day before this incident, or a very short while before this, there was a camel that was slaughtered. There was a feast, basically. They slaughtered a camel and they ate a camel. So one of them basically said to the other in this gathering, "Whom amongst you, أيكم يجيء بسلا جزور بني فلان فيضعه على ظهر محمد إذا سجد." SubhanAllah, like there's a level of evil that you need a certain mindset to even come up with these kinds of plans. And they start asking, one of them asked, who will volunteer to take the carcass of this camel, the dead remains of this camel, and to take the entrails and the organs and whatnot of the camel, and to throw them on Prophet Muhammad ﷺ while he is in sujood. The same man brings himself forward, Uqba bin Abi Mu'ayt. And the narration even says, Abdullah Mas'ud, he says, فَانْبَعَثَ أَشْقَى الْقَوْمِ. The worst of all the people stepped forward, and that was Uqba bin Abi Mu'ayt. And I want you to think for a second. Like, these are nobility. These are people with supposedly with reputation and honor. This man has so much evil and hate in his heart that he is literally willing to go to the dumpsters of Makkah and with his bare hands grab the disgusting filth of the camel and organs and blood and whatever you can imagine with his own hands and carry it all the way to the Kaaba and to drop it. What kind of people are these? And so Uqba, he does this. And he walks all the way and he grabs the dead entrails of this camel and he walks all the way back. And when Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he did sajda, Uqba drops all of these entrails on Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, on his back and on his neck. And subhanAllah, the weight of this camel was so heavy that the Prophet ﷺ was not even able to get back up from sajda. And when he did this, in the distance, Abu Jahl and his companions, they fell back in laughter. Some of them leaned against each other. It is mentioned some of them would like hit each other on the leg as they were laughing out loud. And Ibn Mas'ud, he says, I'm seeing this, and I had wished that I was able to go and do anything, but I know I can't. Ibn Mas'ud, again, he's a middle class citizen. He's closer to a slave class than he is to nobility. And he says, I'm seeing this, but I had no way to help. And it is mentioned that he remained in this state for a while, unable to get off of sajda, until some people basically went and they told Fatima radiallahu anha. And when I say Fatima radiallahu anha, how old is Fatima at this point? Barely 7, 8 years old? So They go to this 8-year-old girl and they tell her, your father needs help. And imagine this little girl running, crying, seeing her father like this, and she is the one who is taking off the entrails of the camel. And eventually, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was able to get back up. So when he got up, he stood up and he turned and he faced them as they were laughing, and he raised his hands. And as soon as he raised his hands, all of them turned silent. And he said, Allahumma alayka bi Quraysh. Allahumma alayka bi Quraysh. Allahumma alayka bi Quraysh. Oh Allah, you deal with Quraysh. Oh Allah, you, he said it 3 times. Oh Allah, you deal with Quraysh. And then he made dua against them by name. Allahumma alayka bi Uqba bin Abi Mu'ayt. Allahumma alayka bi Utbah bin Rabi'ah. Allahumma alayka bi Shaybah bin Rabi'ah. Allahumma alayka bi Walid ibn Utbah. Allahumma alayka bi Umayyah. Just one by one, all of them, the people who were sitting there and laughing, and the people who were responsible for this incident. Ibn Mas'ud continues in the narration. He says, I swear by the one who sent Muhammad ﷺ with the truth, I myself saw that every one of these people whom Prophet Muhammad ﷺ made dua against, I saw their bodies dragged and being thrown into the well of Badr. Meaning, all of them met their death in the battle of Badr. In the first battle against the Muslims, Allah would take care of all of them. And the battle of Badr is not that long away from this moment on. This is now we're talking 4th, 5th year of Dawah. The Hijrah of Medina happened in the 12th, 13th year of Dawah, so only a few years away. It is mentioned also of the enemies of Islam, Umayyah bin Khalaf. We spoke about Umayyah bin Khalaf last week. The master of Bilal, the one who used to personally torture Bilal, he would also take part in harming Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. The books mention that he would do hams and lems, and as a result, Allah Azza wa Jal revealed against Umayyah bin Khalaf, وَيْلٌ لِكُلِّ هُمَزَةٍ لُمَزَةٍ. Now, what is hams and what is lems? Hams is to basically harm someone publicly, and usually it's like a severe kind of harm. Whether it is with the tongue or whether it is by physically beating them or something. So Umayyah used to do hams. So he would, and most likely this was in form of verbal insult. So he would really make a joke out of Prophet Muhammad and he would go very far to insult him. And he would also do lems. What is lems? Lems, it is basically backbiting, speaking about someone behind their backs badly, spreading rumors about them, winking and doing movements with your face when they are around. So hams is kind of like directly harming someone. Lems is indirectly harming someone. So Umayyah bin Khalaf, he would do these things. Umayyah bin Khalaf's brother as well, he was just as guilty as him. And his brother, his name is Ubay ibn Khalaf, who was also basically just as bad as all of these people. Just as bad as Abu Jahl, just as bad as Uqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt. It is mentioned also, there's many stories about them. One time, he was heard, Ubay ibn Khalaf, one time it is mentioned that he sat down and he heard the message of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And Uqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt, he heard about this, and he said to Ubay ibn Khalaf essentially, like basically, I'm upset at you. You need to go and do something to redeem yourself. And so Ubay ibn Khalaf walks to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and he spat on his face. In another narration, it is mentioned that one time he walked up to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and he was holding in his hand a pile of bones that belonged to a camel that had died a long time ago. And he goes in front of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and he crushes these bones into dust and he blows the dust on the face of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And he says to him, you're telling me and you're claiming that your Lord is going to bring back these bones that I crushed back into one piece, and he's going to bring them one day back to life, meaning i.e. like when we die we're going to come back to life. And so Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he says, yes, this is exactly what I'm telling you, except that when Allah brings back your bones, you're going to be thrown into the hellfire. And Allah revealed as a result of this incident as well, Allah Azza wa Jalla reveals in Surah Yasin, وَضَرَبَ لَنَا مَثَلًا وَنَسِيَ خَلْقَهُ, that he's giving forth an example. He thinks he's being smart by showing these bones. and he forgot his own creation, and he asks, فقال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم. He asks, who brings back and resurrects these bones when they are nothing but dust? قل يحييها الذي خلقها أول مرة. The one who created it in the first place, he is able to bring it back to life. الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا. So these verses were also revealed. Also about Ubay ibn Khalaf, one time he declared publicly that I am going to be the one who kills Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I am going to be the one who kills him. The news reached Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he did not stay quiet. And he says, rather, I shall be the one to kill Ubay ibn Khalaf. Fast forward into the Battle of Uhud, and in fact, in the entire lifetime of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the only man who was killed by the hand of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was Ubay ibn Khalaf. The only person. Now, we read, there's more narrations as well, of course, but one thing we need to ponder upon. We read about all of these incidents. A camel is thrown on Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's being choked to his death. People are spitting on him. People are laughing at him. If this is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, the best of all the prophets, and his Sahaba are the best of all the people, and radiyallahu anhum wa radu anhu, Allah loves them and Allah is pleased with them, why are they being tested in this manner? What's the wisdom behind Allah Azza wa Jal letting all of this persecution and all of this humiliation and punishment take place? Why doesn't Allah, just as Khabbab had went up to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he said, why doesn't Allah just give them victory? Why doesn't Allah just give them immediate victory? Why are the best people to walk on the face on the earth being tortured in this manner? And honestly, the answer to this question is the best lesson you can learn from the entire Seerah. If you learn nothing from the Seerah except for this one lesson, then inshallah that is good enough. And this is a theme that repeats itself over and over and over throughout the Seerah. This is a reminder to the Sahaba. And through the reminder to the Sahaba, it is a reminder to us that we are not created to live a comfortable life. This life that we are living right now, it is not a life of comfort. It is a life of testing. It is a life of difficulty. There is a purpose of us, of Allah creating us and putting us in this world. The purpose and the goal is not in this world. The goal is in the next world. Allah Azza wa Jal says in the Quran, الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا. Allah created, the whole reason Allah created something called life and something called death is so that Allah can test you and can see and rank you guys and to grade all of us and to see who is the best and who is the worst. It's like a grading. And some people get an A+, some people get a B, some people get an F. Every human being is subject to something difficult, is subject to times of difficulty and sadness. Allah Azza wa Jal proclaims in the Quran, وَأَنَّهُ هُوَ أَضْحَكَ وَأَبْكَى. Allah is the one who causes happiness. And Allah is also the one who causes sadness. So, one of the wisdoms is to earn Allah's mercy through the patience in these difficulties. When a person is patient and he perseveres and he puts his faith and his trust in Allah Azza wa Jal, then his reward is Allah's rahmah and mercy such that he might enter Jannah. So that Allah Azza wa Jal can basically put all of mankind through a sift. And He would sift all of the mankind. And only those who are pure would be eligible to enter Jannah. And the Quran is full of these reminders. Allah Azza wa Jal says, ألف لام ميم أحسب الناس أن يتركوا أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون. Do people really think they will be left alone to say, I believe in Allah, and then Allah would not put them into the test to see if they are true to what they say? It's very easy, wallahi, to say that I'm a believer, that I'm a Muslim. I believe in Allah. I believe in the Day of Judgment. I truly, truly love Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if anyone ever asks you, do you love Allah? Do you love the Prophet? We, in fact, some of us will get offended, like, how dare you ask me this kind of question? But actions speak louder than words. And actions, true actions, your true form shows itself only in the face of difficulty. Allah Azza wa Jalla says in the Quran, أَمْ حَسِبْتُمْ أَن تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ وَلَمَّا يَأْتِكُمْ مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ خَلَوْا مِن قَبْلِكُمْ. Do you think Jannah is for free? You think you will enter Jannah without tasting a little bit of what the people before you faced in terms of difficulty? أَمْ حَسِبْتُمْ أن تدخلوا الجنة ولما يعلم الله الذين جاهدوا منكم ويعلم الصابرين. Do you think you will allow everybody will be allowed to enter Jannah without Allah testing people to see who is truly the mujahid, persevering, and who is the one who is patient? So all of these are reminders found in the Quran, and once again we find them in the Seerah. The main theme of the Seerah is this exact lesson which I have just told you. Plus we have on top of this the reply of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to Khabbab ibn al-Arat. When he went and he complained to him, he told him, verily, لَيُتِمَّنَّ اللَّهُ هَذَا الْأَمْرِ. Allah shall make this matter. Allah shall bring His victory forward. But you need to be patient. You're being too hasty. You need to be patient. So this shows us the blessings of Allah Azza wa Jal, and the salvation, it comes through the testing. There has to be a test. Allah Azza wa Jal gives us glad tidings in the Quran. Inna ma'al usri yusra. With difficulty comes ease. So the ease will come, but there has to be difficulty first. There has to be difficulty first, and not even the prophets of Allah were exempt from this rule. And plus there is another wisdom, in fact, such that we people living in 2024, we don't look back whenever we have difficulties and sadness and hardships. We don't look, oh, well, the people 1,400 years ago, they didn't face any hardships. They had a prophet who made a dua, and then Allah just gave them down all the miracles and all the victory, and they didn't struggle. Rather, Allah is showing us, these are people who struggled way beyond our imagination. Wallahi, we would not be able to handle a fraction of what the Sahaba faced. And today you will never find a Muslim who rejects the suffering of the Sahaba, that would reject the suffering of Bilal, that would reject the suffering of Ammar ibn Yasir. We all recognize that these are great people, but their suffering was as great as their own reputation. So, through all of these incidents, through all these stories of Bilal and Khabbab, and even these stories of harming Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, these truly show us and prove to us that they are in fact better than us. And they are our role models. And that Allah doesn't just say in the Quran, radiyallahu anhum radu anh, just like that. Just out of luck, oh, they were so lucky to born in the age of the Sahaba. Do you even understand a fraction of the difficulty that these people faced? So, we have role models such that when I face difficulties in my life, when I face any kind of persecution, whether it is someone insulting me, or someone harmed me physically or financially, whatever it is, I can look back and see, well, these people had it way worse. And I can see how these people react to their hardships, and I can also learn a thing or two from them, and I can react in the same way. So, anyhow, once all of this persecution began taking place, and once the Muslims, they had a relatively decent number of Muslims, probably at this point, we don't have any, this is just an estimate, probably most likely they're around 40, 50 Muslims, maybe a little bit less even than this. Prophet ﷺ, he and the Muslims, of course, they realize we need a place to get together. We need a place for us to be able to gather, because we can't just go out in public. A lot of the Muslims were secret converts, and they didn't want to expose their Islam. And there was a lot of persecution happening on the outside, so they needed a place where they can be safe and they can be discussing with one another, sitting, basically getting together, congregating with one another. And there were no masajid at the time. The only quote-unquote masjid that was found in Mecca at the time was the Haram, the Kaaba itself, right? The area of the Masjid al-Haram. So the Prophet ﷺ, he decided to choose the house of a Sahabi by the name of Al-Arqam ibn Abi Al-Arqam, radiyallahu anhu. Al-Arqam ibn Abi Al-Arqam. And his real name is Abdi Manaf ibn Asad. And his name is Al-Arqam ibn Abi Al-Arqam. So his house became known as the famous Darul Arqam. This is Darul Arqam. And it became a place for the Sahaba to regularly meet. Now, why choose the house of Al-Arqam out of all the houses? Why not choose his own house? Why not choose, somewhere else? What's special about his house? First of all, so there's several points that we can find. First of all, Al-Arqam is from the tribe of Banu Makhzum. He is not from Banu Hashim. And you have to think with the mindset of tribalism back in the day. Banu Hashim and Banu Makhzum, they weren't on bad terms, but they were very competitive with each other. So you will not easily find someone from Banu Makhzum cooperating with someone from Banu Hashim because they're rivals. So no one will suspect that someone from Banu Makhzum is helping someone from Banu Hashim. That's one point. Another point that is mentioned, it is also mentioned that Al-Arqam was of the first people to accept Islam. So basically he was someone to be trusted. In some books it even mentions he was the 7th person to convert into Islam. Some say he was in the first 10. Allahu A'lam, but he was of the first people to convert into Islam. Al-Arqam also, it appears, inherited this house from his father. And Al-Arqam, he was not an old person, he was a young man, 16 years old or so. He was very young and he had a house. And as a result of his age, nobody would suspect a 16-year-old to basically risk it all for the sake of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Plus there's the age gap. Nobody would think that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ would get along with a young teenager, and he would be going over to his house and he would tell the Sahaba, come to the house of this young teenager. So it avoids any kind of suspicion. Al-Arqam also was of the people who kept his Islam a secret. And had Prophet Muhammad ﷺ chosen his own house or the house of someone who had publicly exposed his Islam, the Quraysh would be likely to suspect that these might be areas of gathering. But Al-Arqam, is less likely that they're going to suspect him because he did not declare his Islam. Also, and this is an interesting point, the house of Al-Arqam is located right behind the mountain of Safa. Like, mountain of Safa, this is right in front of the Kaaba. Like, this is like right in the middle of downtown Mecca, literally. The most crowded place you can have. Now pause here for a second. Logically speaking, if I want a secret headquarters where I want to meet with the Muslims, shouldn't I be choosing a place that is farther, remote, no people are watching? Why would he choose a place in downtown? Who can take a guess? Very logical answer, by the way. Aha, Jazakallah khair. Imagine what would happen if now you have 20, 30 Sahabas walking in the same direction out of town. It's easy to pick up. However, if 20, 30 Sahabas are going towards As-Safa, everybody's going in the direction of Safa. Muslim, non-Muslim, people want to do their business, people want to gather. So it's easy to blend in with the crowd. It's easy to blend in with the traffic. And also it is implied, this is not found in any narration, but Allahu A'lam, it's implied that the house of Al-Arqam was a large house, that compared to the other houses. And this is, again, not found in any narrations. This is just, Allahu A'lam, it just seems logical that his house seems to be larger than other Sahaba. So this became basically the center for the Muslims. where they began gathering together, where they began to discuss issues of Islam. And this is also the house where many of the Muslims would later come to also convert, including also Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. He would later come to Dar al-Arqam to also convert. So this is all happening around the 5th year of the da'wah. So this is now the peak persecution that is happening against the Muslims. So after all of these stories and tactics of punishment and torturing and persecution, the Prophet ﷺ eventually suggested to the Sahaba, and he said to them, لو خرجتم إلى أرض الحبشة فإنها بها ملكا لا يظلم عنده أحد. Mecca has now become too tight upon you guys. He's talking to the Sahaba. And why don't you go and migrate to a land called the land of Al-Habasha. Al-Habasha, in English, it is Abyssinia. Or in modern day, we're talking about Ethiopia. So there was the kingdom of Abyssinia back in the day. Because it has a just king, a king who is just. And he is a Christian king. وهي أرض صدق وحتى يجعل الله لكم فرجا مما أنتم فيه. That you can stay in this land until Allah Azza wa Jal makes the matter easy for you guys. And in this land is a just king. He will not interfere with your matters of worship. Meaning you will have the freedom to worship there without persecution. In the books of Seerah, they mention that this announcement was made in the month of Rajab, of the 5th year of the da'wah. Now, to us, as people living in 2024, this is like a normal announcement. Like someone, when we hear the news, oh, someone is traveling away, or someone is moving to another city, whether it's someone moving from Calgary to Toronto, or someone is moving, I don't know. It's normal for us to talk about these things. Back in the day, traveling was extremely difficult. And it is almost very, very rare to find someone who will leave their own land and to go and live in another land. That's like almost never found. Because again, you have to think in the mindset of tribalism. Your tribe is your passport. Your tribe is your protection, your visa. If you leave your tribe, you are throwing away your passport. You're throwing away your protection. Now you're no longer protected. No one is there to protect you. Even if you go in the foreign land, if they do something to you, well, too bad. You're not protected. Nobody's protecting you. So, and this also means, now today we have bank accounts. Migrating and living somewhere else means leaving your wealth behind. Or only taking basically whatever you're able to take with. If you have a camel, you just load up however much you can in your camel, and you leave everything behind. You can't take you don't have a bank account, you don't have a shipping company. Okay? So this was a very difficult decision. But it was a time of great need and difficulty. So Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he gave this command to migrate, and it is mentioned that 16 people migrated to Abyssinia. 16. There were 12 men and 4 women. And their leader was Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu, and his wife came with him. He was married to Ruqayya binti Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam and radiallahu anha. So both of them immigrated to Abyssinia. And also it mentions a whole list of people who went to Abyssinia. So it mentions their names. Abu Hudhayfa ibn Utbah ibn Rabi'a and his wife, Amir ibn Rabi'a and his wife, Uthman ibn Mad'un, Abdul Rahman ibn Auf. So now we have some famous Sahaba as well. Abdul Rahman ibn Auf was of those who migrated. Az-Zubair ibn Awam was of those who migrated. Mus'ab ibn Umair was of those who migrated. Abu Salama and his wife Ummi Salama, both of them migrated. And again, the list goes on. I'm not going to mention all the names. And it is mentioned that they traveled secretly at night. Now here is where like the narrations are not very clear. Like was it known to Quraysh that they were traveling to Abyssinia, or was it top secret or whatever? The narrations mention a few things, but it seems like, Allahu Alam, it seems that Quraysh knew about this migration, but at the same time they didn't care that much about it. Okay, so for example, here in the narration it mentions that they were traveling secretly at night, and they arrived to Jeddah. So they went from Mecca to the port of Jeddah and they took a ship from there. And it is mentioned that Quraysh gave a little bit of a chase after the Muslims, but they were too late. Basically, by the time they caught up to them, the Muslims had already taken the ship and they had already left. So the Quraysh didn't bother chasing any further, and they didn't really care. So they walked back. Now, by the way, if you were to look at all of these names of the people who migrated, you will find one thing in common between all of them, and that is all of them are nobility. All of them are Qurashi, are the elites. You do not find people like Bilal. You don't find people like Ammar or Khabbab, all of these people. Why? Very simple. These people did not have the ability to migrate. The nobility, they have their freedom. They can go wherever they want. They can travel. They have their camels. They have their, whatever. Nobody's going to stop them. People like Bilal and Ammar and others, slave class. These are slaves and they have masters. They can't simply just walk away and leave. It's not as easy for them. And also we do learn from this that there is no doubt that such a decision was a very difficult for these people to make, to leave their hometown of Mecca and to travel to Abyssinia. But it shows us at the end of the day, a Muslim has to take care of himself. So when faced between persecution in a land that you love versus peace and freedom of religion in a foreign land, you need to take care of yourself. And in this case, the Sahaba were allowed, they were given permission to go and migrate to a non-Muslim land. And non-Muslim lands, they're not all the same. Some non-Muslim lands, they hate the Muslims. They don't like Muslims. Some non-Muslim lands, like the land that we are living in right now, they at the very least give you the freedom of religion. And this is the most important condition. As long as you have the freedom of religion, and the conditions in the place that you are staying are very hostile, then our Islam gives us permission that you can go and live in that land. So like, someone who's living in a land where there's war, civil war taking place, or lots of corruption, lots of killing taking place, and this person fears for their own safety. And so Canada opens up its doors, even though it's a non-Muslim, kafir land, but it opens up the doors and it says, you have the freedom to practice your Islam. If you practice your Islam, nobody will bother you. As long, of course, as you decide to obey the laws of the land. As Canadians, we're not living in Canada so that we can overthrow the government and turn Canada into an Islamic state. This is not what we do here. At the very least, so we have our freedom of religion here in the land, just like the people who migrated to Abyssinia had their religion, their freedom in religion. And one other point to make here, notice how Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is calling the land of Abyssinia a land of justice. Why? So he called the king of the land of Abyssinia a just king. Why? He only mentioned one reason. Because he will allow you to practice your religion freely. And he doesn't mention any other reason. Which shows us that simply giving the freedom of worship, the freedom of religion, makes even a non-Muslim land to be a land of justice, to be a just land. And again, it's very clear here. A lot of scholars I know, they would be like yelling and be like, this kafir countries, whatever, this and that. You have here clearly Prophet Muhammad ﷺ complimenting a Christian king. So, anyways, back to the story. In another report, it seems to indicates otherwise, that it wasn't completely secret and that Quraysh actually knew about it. And this is an incident narrated by Ibn Ishaq in his books. And this incident actually involves Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, who was a big enemy of Islam at the time. He would be, of course, we all know Umar. We're going to talk about Umar al-Khattab very shortly, inshallah. He is very, very physically powerful. He was someone that people did not want to mess with, and he gave the Muslims a very hard time. And even some narrations mention that he did take part in beating some slaves as well. So he was definitely not a friendly person to the Muslims. One of the couples who was traveling to Abyssinia, his name, the husband is Amr ibn Rabi'a, and his wife is Abdullah binti Abi Hathma, whose name was Layla. So Layla was basically packing her luggage and her bags, and she was loading the camel, and she was taking whatever things that she can. Umar ibn Khattab walks by, and he notices this is an unusual sight. Like, this is a family that they're packing their camel up. They're taking so much luggage with them. So Umar, he asks, and he says, إنه للانطلاق يا أم عبد الله. Are you leaving or something, O Abdullah? Like, are you leaving the country? Like, what's going on? Because again, traveling is a very, very big deal. And Layla, and again, we can really sympathize with this lady over here. We all can think of a time, perhaps, when we were moving from different cities. If you guys have ever moved, and then sometimes our spouse or our parents, they are just in that mood where everything is being packaged, and you're just so irritated. You don't want to hear any word from anybody. And so Layla snaps back at Umar al-Khattab. And she says, نعم والله لنخرجن في أرض من أرض الله إذ آذيتمونا وقهرتمونا حتى يجعل الله لنا مخرجا. Yes, we're about to leave, and this is all your fault. It's because of all the persecution and all the terrorizing and all this humiliation that you guys did to us, just because we want to worship Allah, and now we have to find somewhere else to go. So basically, she just takes it out on Umar al-Khattab. And again, this is not a person you want to take it out on. SubhanAllah, instead of Umar getting angry, for the first time ever, Layla actually sees signs of compassion from Umar. SubhanAllah. Umar al-Khattab is a very interesting character. He always appears to be this tough man on the outside, but he has a soft heart when push comes to shove. So Umar actually displays signs of compassion and even a little bit of sadness. And so he simply says to Layla, Sahibakumullah. May Allah be with you. And he just walks away. Layla is completely shocked at this. She had expected like Umar to get angry and get frustrated and start yelling. She was not anticipating this kind of reaction at all. She's now seeing a side of Umar that she didn't even know it existed. So now her husband comes back home. And now she's excited and she's telling him, رأيت عمر آنفا ورقته وحزنه علينا. I just saw Umar not too long ago, and I saw that he showed signs of remorse and compassion and sadness towards us, and she's like excited. And so he snorts at her and he says, you think this man will ever accept Islam? And she says, yes, why not? Yani, inshallah. And he says, والله لا يسلم الذي رأيت حتى يسلم حمار الخطاب. The person, meaning Umar al-Khattab, he will not, the donkey of Umar al-Khattab will accept Islam before Umar al-Khattab. Meaning like you honestly think that a man like Umar al-Khattab will ever accept Islam? And subhanAllah, look how they viewed Umar al-Khattab. And this truly shows us, never judge anyone by the cover. Never make a judgment against anyone. Never point at anyone and say this person will enter Jannah. Never point at someone and say this person is entering Jahannam. Because you don't know what might happen. You don't know how Allah might plan things such that this person whom you never thought would accept Islam would become one of the Ashra Mubashshara, would become one of the Khulafa al-Rashidin. So, and in fact, after this narration, in literally like 1 to 2 years, Umar al-Khattab does accept Islam. And we're going to talk about his story very soon, inshallah. So Salama, she narrates that we began to live in a good land, we had good neighbors, and we were indeed safe in our religion. Nobody bothered us in the religion. However, at the end of the day, and this is some, inshallah, this is where we'll pause. At the end of the day, you're in a strange land and you feel like you're not at home and you're not in the comfort of your home. So, what did the Sahaba do, and how did they react to their life in Abyssinia? We're going to talk about the next time, inshallah. But just before that, again, of the wisdoms of why Abyssinia, I know I already mentioned a few reasons of why Allah Azza wa Jal chose Abyssinia out of all the countries or out of all the lands for the Muslims to migrate to. We discussed, of course, there's no doubt that Prophet ﷺ is commanding them go to Abyssinia, and we mentioned the fact that there is a just king as well and the freedom of worship. Also, it appears that Abyssinia and Quraysh were not complete strangers to each other. They did have some business interactions with one another. So there was a trade route between Mecca and Abyssinia. And the trade route, and this is I guess leads to the second reason, was actually quite easy because all you had to go is to travel from Mecca to Jeddah, which is maybe just like a few days on the camel. And then from Jeddah, you take a ship because Abyssinia is in a different continent. So you take a ship from the port of Jeddah to Abyssinia, and that's also another like and probably a few hours or days or something like that. But either way, it's not overall. It's not a very long journey compared to other places. And lastly, the people of Abyssinia are Christians, and overall, compared to other kinds of religions, Christians are considered to be more open-minded and more tolerant in comparison to other religions. And this is a fact that even the Quran tells us. Allah Azza wa Jalla says, لَتَجِدَنَّ أَشَدَّ النَّاسِ عَدَاوَةً لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا الْيَهُودَ وَالَّذِينَ أَشْرَكُوا. That you will find the most hostile people to the Muslims. This is a rule, a universal rule. The most hostile people to the Muslims, and we see this today, are the Jewish people and the mushrikeen, the pagans who don't, they worship idols and whatnot. Like today, they're like the Hindu or the Buddhists or whatever, whatever they are. And subhanAllah, look at the countries that are being persecuted today, what the religions they are. وَلَتَجِدَنَّ أَقْرَبَهُم مَوَدَّةً لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا الَّذِينَ قَالُوا إِنَّا نَصَارَى. And you will find the closest, or the most tolerant, I guess, of people towards the Muslims are those who said we are inna Nasara, we are Christians. So all of these are just perhaps some reasons that some of the scholars they put down as to why the Prophet ﷺ specifically chose Abyssinia out of all the different countries to migrate to. So inshallah, next week we will talk about the story of what exactly took place in Abyssinia. And in fact, we're going to talk about the second migration to Abyssinia because there was two migrations. There were two migrations to Abyssinia. This is only the first one, and this was a very short trip and a very small group. And then certain events will take place. We'll talk about them next week, which caused them to come back, and then another group goes again. But we'll talk about that next week, inshallah. Are there any questions before we conclude? Yes. So it clearly implies here that you should. You should, if you have the means and the ability, especially if you are living in a place that's restricting you from practicing your religion. So today, for example, if someone is living in a country that does not allow them to wear their hijab, and they're going to get physically harmed, in Kashmir they're being burnt just because of them displaying their Islam. So if someone is living in such a place where there is persecution, torturing, killing, and they have the ability to go somewhere else, yes, they should go somewhere else for their own sake and probably for the sake of their own families as well. Any other questions? So Allah Azza wa Jalla, He begins Surah Al-Ankabut with a rhetorical question. And Allah says, أَحَسِبَ النَّاسُ أَن يُتْرَكُوا. Does mankind think that they will be left alone to say that we believe in Allah without them, Allah basically putting them to the test? This is what it's a rhetorical question. And Allah then continues and He says, وَلَقَدْ فَتَنَّ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ. We've tested the people before them. What makes you think that you're going to be any different? So this is the beginning of Surah Al-Ankabut. Any other questions? Yes? No, no. So they were not exposing their Islam because for their own benefit. And in fact, this allowed them to practice their Islam more comfortably. Well, and even then they weren't so comfortable. Um, but at this stage in the da'wah, and this is of the mercy of Allah Azza wa Jalla, that He does not burden people over what they are able to. At this stage in the da'wah, people were allowed to hide their Islam. And people were allowed to just do what they can in order to get by. To the point where even people like Ammar bin Yasir were allowed to say that I'm a kafir to save their own lives. So, but we're going to see later on, once the conditions start changing, Allah begins revealing verses. And as time goes, the verses become harsher and harsher and harsher towards the Muslims. That hey, you can't stay like this anymore. You gotta be with the Muslims. You can't hide anymore sitting in your house. Um, yeah. Other questions? Okay. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك جزاكم الله خيرا